Hi everyone, I'm Julie with the Elite Graduate Program, and welcome to See Your Name in Print, How to Get Published. Today we are honored to have two people from the library. First we have Ms. Denise Hyde. She is a reference distributed learning librarian at the Jeff and Mary Bell Library here on campus. And we have Dr. Sarah Sutton. She is the serials electronic resources librarian, also at the Jeff and Mary Bell Library. And Dr. Sutton's doctorate is in library and information science, which she recently received in December.
She's a newly minted PhD.
Yay. And with that said, I will hand this over to Dr. Sutton.
Thanks, Julie. I'm going to try and put this on and forget about it. Just don't let me forget to give it to Denise when we swap off. So thank you very much for coming. I'm glad to see that there are lots of people interested in getting published in and doing scholarship here among our graduate students. As Julie mentioned, we are going to talk about getting how to get published, and basically what we'll do is I'm going to talk a little bit about I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction to getting published, what we're going to talk about and what we're not going to talk about, and some of the homework that you may want to do before you submit an article for publication. Denise then is going to talk a bit about some of the tools that the library has to offer that will help you do some of that homework. And then I'm going to finish up by talking just a bit about the actual practical process of getting published in a scholarly journal, what the submission process is like, what to expect after you've submitted a paper, and what to do when you have a paper accepted. So there's lots of ways to get your name in print. Lots of things to publish. You can publish book reviews, you can publish a blog, you can do poster sessions, conference presentations, conference papers, and you can publish in scholarly journals. And what we're going to focus on, or what I'm going to focus on today, is getting scholarship published. I'm mostly going to stick to scholarly journals, getting published in scholarly journals. I may touch a little bit on books, or I'll try and answer questions if there are any about publishing a book or some other forms of publication. But mainly I'm going to talk about getting published in a peer-reviewed or a scholarly journal. And that's really a good place to start. We have folks from almost all of the colleges here, and where you publish depends a lot, or where you choose to publish depends a lot on the discipline that you're in. And that has to do with the publications that discipline finds most valuable. Historians, for instance, tend to, and people in English, the English discipline, tend to write books rather than articles. In the social sciences, generally speaking, and I really am going to speak pretty generally and try and cover all of the disciplines, but generally speaking in the social sciences, it's publications in scholarly journals that count more than some of the other forms of publications. In the sciences, a lot of times, computer science in particular, and I know we have a computer scientist here, computer science tends to put a lot of value on conference publications and conference papers. And a lot of that goes back to the way that particular discipline works. And I'll stick with computer science for a second and say that one of the reasons that I think that computer science tends to put a high value on conference presentations is that gets the work, the scholarship, out there the most quickly. The other end of the spectrum probably would be, I was talking about historians and historians tending to publish books rather than articles, or put value at least on publishing books or doing conference presentations. And one of the disadvantages to publishing a book is that it takes an awful lot of time, awful long time to write a book, as opposed to, if you think about it in terms of the amount of time it might take for you, say, to write a scholarly journal article. So, but it's good to keep in mind that different disciplines place different levels of value on different types of scholarly publication, because one of the things, really, the first thing that you want to think about as you're thinking about finding something, someplace, and something to publish is where you want to publish it. Because that's going to drive what you write to some extent. It's certainly going to drive how you write. And what I'm going to suggest is to all of you budding authors is that you choose a particular scholarly journal. Not just, I want to publish an article in a scholarly journal, but I want to publish in this particular scholarly journal. Before you really start to write your paper, or if you're maybe revising a paper from that you've submitted for a class assignment, before you do that, you really do want to think about where you want to publish it. And as you're thinking about that, you want to look around, talk to people in your discipline, talk to your faculty members and your classmates and your colleagues, and find out where they're publishing. Faculty particularly, are they publishing, what journals are they publishing in? Because that's going to give you a clue as to the value that they place on a particular journal. And I'm talking about the value that's placed on a particular journal a lot, and I should probably stop and explain that the purpose of publishing is to get your research out there, right? Get somebody else to read it, get exposure, and share what you've learned with other scholars in your discipline. So it makes sense that you want to publish where those people are reading. But another reason for publishing is to get a job or to keep the job that you have. If you're a faculty member, for instance, one of your job responsibilities is going to be to publish, to do research and to publish it. And when it comes time for your faculty supervisors, the chair of your department and your dean, when it comes time to prove to them that you're doing valid and valuable scholarship, where you have published it is going to make a big difference to them. So you want to know where people in your field are publishing, and you want to know what kinds of publications what kinds of publications they are submitting. Are they writing books? Are they writing articles? Are they doing conference presentations? Another question you might want to ask yourself is, what kinds of formats are those journals particularly published in? Would you consider publishing in an online journal? Or do people in your discipline tend to publish more in print journals than online journals? Does everybody know what open access is? Heard the word before? Open access publishing is publishing scholarly work and making it freely available on the internet. Freely available, as opposed to submitting it to a journal, for instance, to which the library or you personally would have to subscribe, meaning you'd have to pay for it. And open access publishing has gotten a lot of press, particularly in the library world, but in other disciplines as well lately, particularly, and Denise is going to go into this in a little bit more depth, but it's gotten a lot of press, particularly because there's been legislation lately that is beginning to, or really does, require authors who are doing research that's funded by a federal grant. These grants oftentimes require that the results of the research that's done with those funds be made available, freely available, through open access means. The idea behind that being that the taxpayers have funded that research and they deserve to have access to the results of that research without having to pay a subscription fee again. Now, open access publishing has different reputations in different disciplines. Some disciplines have embraced it completely, other disciplines maybe not so much. And I'm going back to the idea of value of the publication, value of the journal that you're publishing in, and that value to you, but also to the people to whom you are trying to disseminate your research. So if you're in a discipline that doesn't place a high value on open access publication, then an open access publication may not be the first place, your first choice for submitting an article. That's something that you want to know. Talked a little bit already about why you might want to publish, and the main reason is to disseminate the results of your research. Your opinions, your expert, scholarly opinions particularly. So the message here really is do your homework. Do your homework about your discipline, and do your homework about the specific journals that you're thinking about publishing in. And there are some other things that go into doing your homework. Being a good writer is some homework that you want to do. And there's lots of ways to be a good writer. Practice is the primary one, at least in my experience. The more you practice writing, the easier it is, and the better you get at it. And you've been practicing research. You've been practicing writing. You write class assignments. You might consider writing book reviews. A lot of the, not necessarily scholarly publications, but we call them trade magazines, those journals and magazines that have a specific focus on a specific discipline. Those are the ones that you turn to when you're looking for jobs. They tend to have job ads, but they also tend to publish book reviews on books in your particular discipline. You might consider offering to write a book review. It's another way to practice writing, practice being a good writer. Collaborating with faculty as well as your classmates and your colleagues is another good way, not only to find out about the kinds of publications that people in your field are publishing in, but also to get help with your writing. Particularly if you are collaborating with a faculty member, somebody who's doing research that you're interested in or is research that you might be helping with. You might be a graduate assistant in with a particular faculty member. Publishing something with that faculty member is going to give you experience in writing in that particular discipline. Always, when you've written something, have other people look at it. Those same classmates and faculty members that you've been practicing writing with. If you're writing something on your own, ask somebody to look at it. Get someone else's opinion. And I'm not just talking about proofreading. I'm talking about the content, what you're actually saying in your article. A lot of times, a more experienced colleague or a faculty member can help you organize your thoughts in an article. You're actually doing one of the things that I would suggest as far as doing your homework, attending sessions like this. If you go to a professional conference in your specific discipline, I know in library science, we go to conferences once or twice a year, and there's almost always a workshop or a conference session for people who are new to that field, talking about how to get published, who to talk to, what kinds of things editors are currently looking for in terms of publishing. Read, read, read. Read what's being written in your discipline. Lots of reasons for that. One is to find out what other people are doing, because you don't necessarily want to submit an article to a journal that talks about a research topic or a research question that someone has just recently finished looking at. You don't want to repeat what somebody else has done. You also want to read, particularly when you've decided on a journal to submit your work to, you want to read some of the recent articles that have been published in that journal. And you're looking for not just the content of those articles. You're looking for the style and the tone of those articles. Because one of the things that is going to sell your article to a particular publication is that it matches isn't exactly the right tone, but it's pretty close. It matches the tone and the writing style of that particular journal. It also tells you some things about the length of articles that that particular publication accepts. Yeah, mimicking writing style is what I've written in my notes, and that's one of the things, especially, and that goes back also to being a good writer. Read some articles in the publication or publications that you have decided you want to publish in, and in your own writing, try to mimic that style and the tone and use the same kind of language that articles that have already been accepted for publication are using. When you're choosing a journal to submit an article to, you definitely want to look at the guidelines for authors, and all scholarly journals publish somewhere guidelines for people who are thinking of submitting an article to that particular journal. A lot of times in the physical print copy of the journal, you'll find that at the very end. Online journals tend to have a tab or a link to that information somewhere on the main page of the website, the journal's website, the same page that you'll find tables of contents for recent issues. Look at things like the length of the articles that they're accepting. Look at things like citation style. I know in social sciences, most of the time, journals are looking for APA style, but as you branch out, you're going to find different styles required. In the sciences, particularly, oftentimes a journal has its own citation style. That's going to affect how you put your citations into your paper and how you format your bibliography. And if you can, talk to somebody who has already had an article accepted to that publication. If you have a faculty mentor, or if you have a colleague or a classmate who's already had an article accepted for publication somewhere, talk to them about the guidelines for publication in that particular journal. How do I want to wrap this up? There are some things that you can, in addition to the author guidelines, this is how I'll segue Denise in. In addition to the author guidelines in a journal, you also, when you're choosing the journal that you want to publish in, you want to find things out about that particular journal. Things like, does anybody know what I mean if I say impact factor? Okay. You want to find out what the impact factor is. That's another guide to helping you judge the value of that journal in the discipline or the community of people who are publishing there. You also might want to, there's another thing, impact factor. Search databases. Yeah, it's completely left my mind. So I'm going to stop and I'm going to let Denise show you some of the tools that the library makes available to you for making some of the determinations, making some of the choices that I've talked about so far. I'm going to
borrow the microphone from you.
See, I knew I'd forget.
And I'm going to ask Sarah to do the computer running around too. Just an FYI, one of the more recent examples of open access publication hit close to home because after the BP oil spill, Hart Research Institute in '09 had published a multi-volume set that dealt with biodiversity in the Gulf. Some of you may be familiar with that. but the biodiversity volume showed what organisms lived in, is to see what other authors out there where they have published their work that's similar to yours. So if we did, Sarah, could we do like oil spill and with the asterisk and Gulf and Mexico? And then we'll want to change that to topic, yeah. And then I think you can just say and, yeah. And we'll just search on that, since that's a recent example. And so we've got 75 articles that deal in some way with spills in the Gulf of Mexico. And of course, some of these are really recent, like that first one is from March, this month. So you can see in each of these what the source is. I just chose this topic because it's been so much in the news lately, but whatever topic you're searching for, go ahead and do some literature searching and then see where other experts are publishing their articles that are similar to your topic. Let's see. Let's go to Ulrich's periodicals directory if we could. Oh, and I'm sorry, while we're here, you can tell impact factor from here as well. Let's see if we, you want to click on, say, maybe record number 3, the title. I think, if I'm not mistaken, on the right-hand side, if you scroll down, yeah, okay. There we go. And there's information here on that, but the more important a journal is to the field, the more likely that you're going to be focused in that direction. Do you have anything that you'd like to add to this, since you've probably used this more than I have?
The only thing
the impact. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry.
I'll just come stand with you. The only thing that I would add would be that this is telling you the one thing that I left out for doing your homework section. One of the other things that you want to know about a journal that will help you determine its value to your peers is the number of times that articles in that journal are cited. And that's basically what the impact factor is telling you. It's the number of times that an average article in that journal is cited. So these are actually pretty good numbers. I was noticing on this page.
And that's Marine Technology Society Journal in this case.
If I go back to our results list,
Yeah.
the article that Denise, the first article on the list has actually, it was published this month, March 2011. It's already been cited twice.
That's pretty
That's
good.
pretty fast.
Mm-hmm. So that's the other neat thing about Web of Science database. You can see how often articles have been cited by other authors. So that does give you an indication of the importance in which the field holds that journal. Okay, let's go to Ulrich's periodicals directory. Have any of you heard of Ulrich's periodical directory? Okay, this is a really neat resource to know about, and we have to go to Find Database. Since we know the name of the database, Sarah's just keying that in. This is an international directory of periodicals, so it's huge, huge. And you can find out a lot of information on each of these journals or newspapers, periodicals, whatever. Let's see, do you want to try, well, just any journal title, and then we'll call up.
How about water, air, and soil pollution?
Okay.
That's the one we were just looking at.
That's good. And you can tell whether or not these are refereed journals, whether or not they are electronic, whether or not they're open access. And this is a relatively new thing. I mean, just a few years ago, there were essentially a handful of those open access journals. Now there are thousands of them. So in a very short period of time, this open access movement has taken hold. And I'm going to talk to y'all a little bit later about institutional repositories. Has anybody heard of institutional repositories? Universities increasingly are putting their own faculty members' works on that institution's site, where they are freely and readily available. So you see a lot of that happening now. And there's the basic information about that journal, but this can be really helpful, particularly when you're trying to find a journal in which you might publish. Where is it abstracted and indexed? Because you want people to be able to find it. There's more publisher information there, contact information, web addresses, all sorts of neat info, and whether or not reviews are included in that journal. But this Ulrich's periodicals directory is a really great resource, especially when you're looking for things that come out periodically, including irregular serials and annuals. So, and conference proceedings. Thanks. Yeah. Okay. So Ulrich's is a really good one to know about. Let's look at Directory of Open Access Journals, because as I say, that's a relatively new, well, relatively new, over a decade old, but it's gained in momentum. And what you can do here is to search to see if there are journals in your field that publish this way. We can browse. We can also look by subject, which is particularly of interest. So let's just pick one of those. Well, there is, let's see, gosh. Okay. And psychology. I did notice a few psychology as well. So there are 425 journals within the field of education that are being published openly and freely accessible. As Sarah pointed out before, though, you want to be sure if you're at university that your promotion tenure committee puts as much value on publication in an open access journal as they do, say, limnology and oceanography, or a journal like that that's got a very solid, long reputation. I do think, though, that increasingly this will be looked at for promotion and tenure, because the cost of journals is out of sight. We spend multi-thousands of dollars every year on all of these databases, many of which have access to full text. But it's that full text that costs so much. And let's see, I was going to say something else there too, and I've lost it. Let's see, yeah. Oh, one of those databases, like Web of Science, I believe that's about $100,000 a year. That's one database, $100,000 a year, every year. And then with inflation, that cost goes up every year. So I think you can see why academics, looking at the kind of budget cuts that we're in for and realizing that the cost of what we have is going up. So that means just holding on to what we have is going to be super difficult, if not impossible, actually. We'll probably end up having to drop some databases, although it's not going to be the critical ones, because we've got to support our programs of study. But you can do the math, and when you look at those budget cuts and you look at the cost of these journals and databases, it's kind of mind-boggling, really. So open access, here we come. And we are, at A&M Corpus Christi, taking part in what is known as the Texas Digital Library, involving a number of universities throughout the state. And I'll look at that a little bit more closely, let's see. Well, let me just go on into that now. This is a good time to do it. One of the first of these institutional repositories was from California, the California Digital Library. And that contains the publications of, I believe it's primarily the University of California system, but if you look at their faculty, a large percentage of the scholarly journal material comes from UC faculty members. They're very prolific. So no wonder that California Digital Library was one of the first. But let's see, that e-scholarship, that's Texas. If we could just take a quick look at California, I think it's the e-scholarship. Yeah, down below in the lower left-hand corner. Yeah, just so you can see. So mainly, I believe it's UC mainly. There might be some other California institutions, but their faculty members' publications are here. Sometimes, in the case of publishers like Elsevier, the largest scientific publisher in the world, I believe the deal is after the publication has been out for something like 6 months, then I think the professors can upload their full text articles to the repository, something along those lines. Elsevier still wants to sell subscriptions. That's how they stay in business. But again, the cost of some of those is just super high. And it looks like, in many ways, the needs of the stockholders take precedence over the needs of research and getting that material out as widely and as quickly as possible. So that's kind of what we're dealing with there. Let's go to Texas Digital Library now, because this library is being built, and we are taking part in it. You'll notice that journals and conferences over on the right-hand side, and we'll just take a look at some of the journals that are out there already, and of course this is going to grow. And actually for conferences, I'm going to a marine science conference next week at A&M Galveston, and they have their website for that conference up on Texas Digital Library. So that's kind of interesting too. List of journals, where are they? Okay, those are the featured ones. List of all journals down under featured journals column at the end, just so they can get a feel for all of the journals there. And if you scroll down, we've got Journal of Digital Information, is that what it was? Journal of Virtual Worlds Research, Journal of Texas Women Writers, Texas Water Journal, Cormac McCarthy Journal, CEA Forum, I'm not that familiar with that one, Library Leadership and Management, and then you can see some proceedings there. And once again, this is going to continue to grow. So our state has its own digital library.
So these are journals that have opted to post their
content
on
right.
Texas.
And it's freely available. Anybody can get to this. And when you think about it, all of these journals that Elsevier and publishers like that make a fortune off of, those articles are the result of our faculty's work. So faculties throughout the country do all that research. They get published in journals, but then the academic libraries have to buy all that back at horrendous prices. So something's got to give in that model, and that's why open access has become increasingly important, especially when we start looking at budget cuts like what this state and states all over the union are getting. Okay, let's see. Shall we go to the directory of open access journals, just so you can see what's out there? If you go to the library page again, It's, it is under the Directories tab, encyclopedias, directories, and dictionaries. If you click on those words, and I'm going to recommend that you click on those words, not in that little bubble off to the left, because that lets you go into the individual database. If you had clicked in the little bubble off to the left, the system, I mean, it's great to be able to do this, but what the system will do is search up to 15 databases simultaneously. Good to know you can do that, but when you want the full search power of the search engine, it's best to go into the individual database. So that's where we are. And let's see, we can browse. Do you want to try psychology now, since we've got, I think, at least one psychology person? Science General, let's see, maybe they're not.
Go to social.
Okay,
Sorry.
yeah, yes, social sciences, that's good, yeah. Okay, so there's psychology. There are 143 journals available on an open access basis out there now. And remember, just a few years ago, there were like a handful of these. Thousands now. Interesting. Very rapid growth. You do want peer review, though, and I think most of these are peer reviewed. This is an international directory, so just something to keep in mind. Another way to go, another place to be published. PLOS, Public Library of Science. This is a really good example. Once again, Public Library of Science is openly available. And we should have, okay, yeah. There we go. And if you can scroll down, Sarah, there's, let's see, there's a listing of the journals. Where are they? Maybe it's up at the top again, sorry. I can't, I know there's a list. Oh, there we go, thank you. On the right-hand side, PLOS Biology, Medicine, Computational Biology, Genetics, Pathogens. PLOS 1 includes multiple disciplines. Neglected tropical diseases. So once again, this is growing. It started out with, I think, 1 and is growing a bit. Bio 1 I've also mentioned, but I think what I'll do is just move on to alternate publishers now. And I had mentioned university presses. Stanford University Library's Highwire Press. Let's go there. Again, this is Stanford University. Not all of these journals are freely available, but Stanford's Highwire Press bills itself as the largest collection of scientific articles freely available. It also includes some that you got to pay for. But when you come across examples of journals that you have to pay for in order to see, remember to check Bell Library's journal listing. From the home page, do y'all know how to do that? If you hover over Find and then look at Journals, that is a master list of our journals. So even if you can't get to it full text from Stanford's site, by checking our Find Journals list, you'll be able to tell whether or not we have access to that journal. So in a sense, you know, Highwire might even be a way to discover some things, and then you can come take a look at Bell Library's holdings. Many of these let you look freely at the back files. Some are totally free, and then others, typically it's the most recent materials that you have to pay for, but in many cases you can go look at the back file for free. Okay, so this is a good one to take a look at, really. And then they have all sorts of tools relating to publication and scientific publication. So that's pretty neat. Societies like the American Psychological Association, those are possibilities. And then smaller presses. You can do a Google search on small presses and get some ideas of publishing houses that are not huge, like Elsevier or Pergamon, Francis and Taylor. Okay. And I think that pretty much does it for my section here. So I'm going to pass the microphone again. And we'll take questions too.
Does anybody have any questions for Denise?
Yeah.
How diligent do we need to be when dealing with publishers after we've submitted an article? So I know it takes some time to get it reviewed by peer reviewers, but I mean, how long should we wait until we start sending emails or whatever saying, you know, what's going on?
If you have been able to determine the average length of time that that particular journal takes from submission to, well, from acceptance to publication, that'll give you some guidelines for how long to wait before you contact them. But I would say if you have submitted something and you have heard nothing, I think within a couple of weeks you could drop an email and say, hey, I submitted an article, just wanted to make sure that you received it, you know, to get an acknowledgement of receipt of your journal or of your article. I heard somebody say at one point in answer to that kind of question that it's your work, it's your article, and it's your work, and you have every right to follow up with a publisher without barraging them with emails every day. But you have every right to follow up with them and find out where in the process your article is.
And then you're going to talk to them about alternate.
I am. That's actually the direction that I was going to go. Yes.
I've looked into this before, and it seemed to be like quite a number of journals can actually charge you some pretty hefty fees for them to publish your work. Is that standard, or?
In some disciplines and with some journals, yes. It's an alternative. It's kind of the middle point between, we were talking about open access publishing versus, which is completely freely available, to the publishing where you actually, the traditional publishing where you actually have to pay for a subscription. That author pays model is what I hear it called most often, falls a little bit in the middle. A lot of times a publisher will offer more than one publishing model, more than one publishing option to an author, and they'll say, we'll publish your article in our journal, and we will allow only those people who have paid for a subscription to read it, and we won't charge you a thing, you the author. But if you want to disseminate your work a little bit more widely and you want to make it immediately available, freely available, for instance, on the web, open access, then you can pay us $300. So a lot of times it's a choice. I'm not familiar with any publishers who require you to pay them to publish in their journal. Yeah, now I did hear a story just recently. This was a journal in the sciences, and I don't know the name of the journal, so I can't divulge it. And they actually required that the scholars' university library subscribe to that journal before they would accept an article for publication from him.
Sometimes you can get.
Yeah, shaking of heads, that was my reaction as well. I'm not sure that model is going to.
Sometimes the institution will pay that fee. But I've also worked at a marine science center where I don't think the institution did pay for it.
And
So,
a lot of times people who are doing research or publishing research that is grant funded will build that into their grant proposal. When they submit a grant proposal for the research, it's becoming more and more common that a line item in the research budget is the payment of open access publication fees, especially in the sciences and the health sciences, because it's the National Institute of Health, I believe, that now is required by law to make freely available all of the articles that are funded with government funds.
Within 6 months.
Within 6
I
months.
think, or it might even be a year. There's a time limit.
Yeah.
The folks who were trying to get that passed were trying to get it immediately available to the public, but you have to have that wait time now.
Yeah.
Publishers' lobby is pretty strong.
So let's talk a little bit. Oh, yes.
Would you say in your experience that most reviewers on these journals, are they on a volunteer basis?
Yes. Yes, I would say that is predominantly the model. It's sort of the other side of scholarship. You know, scholars don't get paid for the articles that they submit and they publish. Your reward there is getting your name and your work disseminated, and that's sort of the other side of it is because services is a component of most faculty members' jobs.
Because I've had two different experiences. I had one journal review committee, took a year, and they kept reviewing, and we're going to get to it, and we're going to get to it. And then when I finally, after about a year, said, you know what, if I'd like to just retract, or I want my article back, because it's been a year that you've been reviewing it, and of course, they never published a new
A new issue.
And so they kind of got mad at me because I pulled it back. But it was a year that we were going back, we edited it, and then it's like, okay, we're gonna publish another issue, and it never came. Whereas I had another situation where I submitted a different article to another, and within less than 3 months, they edited it, they went through it, they published it, and I had a published article. So I had two different experiences, and I learned or had heard that it's because they're on a volunteer basis, these
All
reviewers.
of this is volunteer, I think. The peer reviewers typically.
Most peer reviewers are volunteers, but you had a good experience and a really bad experience.
I had a really bad one because they were mad at me, but then it's like,
Well,
it took a year, and I
I've
talked
known 2 years. I knew of an instance where it took 2 years.
But I talked to a
See
faculty,
print.
I talked to Dr., I don't know if you remember Dr. Cassidy, Jack Cassidy in the College of Ed. I talked to him about it, and he said that he's even seen up to 4 years. He said he had an experience where he submitted an article, and eventually it got published, but it took several years, and I thought, that's crazy
this
to
is
wait that long.
And
it's
especially
only
in-
my opinion, but I think you did exactly the right thing. It's, as I have said, it's your work, and you deserve the credit for it, and you deserve to have it out there and have it published. And I think,
And not only that, but to me, the information and the data is another year. You know,
right, it's
time
another year
passes,
older by the
it's
time
not
it gets out there.
fresh, so.
Yeah, yeah. I think that you are have a perfectly valid reason to withdraw your submission and tell them that you want to submit it someplace else because it's, you know, in your experience, it doesn't, in your discipline, it doesn't take that long. But, you know, that's a decision that lots of factors go into, you know, the prestige of the journal. If you've submitted it to the most prestigious journal in your particular field and it takes them 2 years to publish it, well, you may actually decide to leave it with them because of the prestige that's going to come to you and to your institution from having you publish there. So there are lots of factors that weigh into that decision, but in my opinion, you did exactly the right thing.
I know sometimes different journals, they'll do an issue that is themed. Like maybe it's some kind of management journal, so they'll do businesses, and then the next issue they'll do NGOs, and then like government or something like that. Have you heard of cases where like they'll reject an article because it doesn't fit the theme, but maybe they'll hang on to it for a different issue, or?
That's certainly a possibility, and that would be another situation where you would want to weigh your options. You know, do you want to wait excuse me, do you want to wait for the next issue after the special issue that they're currently working on, or do you want to submit it someplace where it might get published a little bit faster? Our conversation is going right in the direction that I was going to take next, and just kind of walk through the submission process and the peer review process, and then what happens after you get your article accepted for publication. So when you're getting ready to submit, you definitely want to refresh your memory on those author guidelines for the journal for submission, and you want to do everything that it says. If it says it wants a cover letter, include a cover letter. In fact, I think it's a good idea to include a cover letter, or at least a brief email, no matter whether the author guidelines call for it or not. You may be asked to provide an abstract and some keywords as well for your article, or sometimes an indexing company or the journal itself will provide additional keywords particularly, but always a good idea to include some keywords. And sometimes they'll also ask for a brief couple of sentences just biographical about you and your discipline and where you're currently working or taking classes. So those are things that you want to maybe have in mind. A lot of times when you're submitting, author guidelines will tell you to include your name on the cover letter only and not on the body of the article. That speeds up to some extent the peer review process, because if it's a blind review, you don't know who the reviewers are, but the reviewers don't know who you are. That would be a reason why they might ask you not to include your name. You know, a lot of times we'll put it in the header or the footer, put your last name in there. And a lot of times the author guidelines will tell you not to do that so they can send it out for blind review. As I can tell, we have some experience in the room. Be prepared to revise. A colleague of mine in the library's significant other just received his PhD, and he's madly now trying to write some articles and get some scholarly publications based on his PhD research. And she says he's having a terrible time because he keeps getting rejections, or he keeps getting things returned with reviewer comments, and they want revisions. And she says he's taking it very personally. He's getting very upset. And I can tell you from experience, don't do that. In fact, it's better, and my experience is, it's better to think of what you submit as a draft, because the reviewers may very well come back, think of something that you hadn't thought of. They'll come back to you and say, I'm getting ahead of myself, but we'll accept you for publication, but we want you to make these revisions. So you want to be prepared for that. And my recommendation is that you kind of think of those revisions that they ask for. They're not, think of them as suggestions to make it better, for improving your article. They're not, reviewers, sometimes contrary to popular belief, they're not there to hurt your feelings. They don't know who you are. They want to play an active role in making your paper better. And if you think of it that way, it's a little bit harder to get your feelings hurt. I had a question over here.
Could you say, like, maybe on average how many reviews you should expect to receive?
Usually you'll have 2 or maybe 3 people reviewing. As far as the number of actual items on a list, we want you to fix A, B, C, D. That's going to vary really, really widely. But
I just meant, like, how many reviewers would be?
Typically 2 or 3. Yeah. Rarely is there just one reviewer, and that's because the editor. One of the reasons that an editor sends it out for a review to start with is to maybe make sure that, and the reviewers don't know who each other are either. So if you get a reviewer that is asking for some really wild revisions, if you've got 2 reviewers, that may balance things a little bit, or 3 reviewers. So it's usually 2 or 3. I wouldn't say that very often that it's more than 3. I think 2 or 3 is pretty typical across disciplines. One of the articles that is in the bibliography that in the handout that we gave you has a really interesting section that talks about common reasons that articles that are submitted for publication are rejected. So I thought I'd share some of those with you. Common reasons for rejection, one of them is that the topic of the article is outside the journal's focus, that the article submitted ignores the journal's submission guidelines, that it was sent with no cover letter, that it was improperly or poorly proofread. We're getting a theme here, if you notice. That it's too long or too short, that the journal has recently published or will soon publish another article on the same or a similar topic. Remember all the things that I talked about when I talked about doing your homework? If you do your homework, you avoid almost all of these. And we've touched on one of the last 2 reasons that articles are rejected, and that is that the journal has already accepted enough articles to fill its next issue. Actually, I think if a publisher sent me back an article that I had submitted and actually said, you know, I'm rejecting this because we already have enough to fill our next issue, especially after the story that you told us, that I think I would be pleased with that. You know, at least they're communicating. They're letting you know that, hey, you know, you may want to take this someplace else because it's going to be a while before we publish our next issue, like maybe 6 months. So that would actually be a nice thing. I have in big letters in my notes. Notice that most of these reasons for rejection are avoidable, and notice that none of them have anything to do with you personally. They're not, so don't take it personally. They're not saying, oh, I don't want his article in my journal. They don't know you. So you've submitted. We talked a little bit already about the peer review process. The journal editor is probably going to send your submission off to 1 or 2 or possibly 3 peer reviewers, and they typically are going to find somebody who not only is someone who's expert in the field that the journal covers, but they're going to try to find someone who is expert or knowledgeable in what you have written about. I wrote an article for an encyclopedia a couple of years ago, and it was on the management of serials in libraries. And I know that the editors of the encyclopedia went to some lengths to find someone, not just a librarian who had volunteered to, you know, be a peer reviewer, but somebody who did the same job that I did, who managed serials in libraries, and so really could tell them whether what I had written was valid and correct. So that now that I think of it, actually could be a reason that it might take a little bit longer. The peer review process might take a little bit longer, especially if you're writing on a topic that is fairly new. If the editor is trying to be diligent and find someone to review your article that is knowledgeable on that topic, if there aren't very many people out there who are knowledgeable on your topic, it might take them a little longer to find somebody to do that. So something to remember. So there's 4 possible outcomes to submitting an article for publication in a scholarly journal. Outright acceptance. They write you back 2 weeks later and they say, this is brilliant, we're going to publish it in 2 weeks. Doesn't happen very often. Pretty rare. But it does happen occasionally. Never to me, but. Another outcome is that they will go ahead and accept your article for publication with some revisions that the peer reviewers have suggested. That means that they're not going to ask you to rewrite and resubmit. It means that as long as you make those revisions and return it to the editor, that they'll accept your article. Not to be confused with probably the most likely outcome, which is revise and resubmit. This is actually a really good thing. The journals, if they have asked you to revise and resubmit, the journal is interested in what you had to say in your article. That's a good thing. Not only that, but they provided you some feedback. They've told you, they're telling you how to make your article even better. Also a good thing. They're telling you that they're willing to consider it for publication. Huge step in the right direction there. They're telling you that they want your article and they want to help you make it better. This is a good thing. Don't take the revisions personally. I've had some really wild revisions requested. I've also had some really good revisions requested. Things that I never even would have thought of in a million years, but were so pertinent to my topic that they were absolutely right. And it made the article better. Some other thoughts about revise and resubmit. Make the revisions as far as it's practical to do so. Hopefully you have revisions requested from at least 2, if not 3 reviewers. So before you start revising, look at what everybody is asking for. If one of your reviewers is asking for something that is to you completely off the wall and unrelated to your subject, I said it before, it's your work. You have every right to write back to the editor and say, I just don't think this particular revision that they're asking for is valid. And you can say, look at what the other reviewers have requested. That doesn't have anything to do well, you don't want to say with what this yo-yo is asking me to do, but you want to say it more politely than that. But you have the right to say that. And you have the right to make a choice. It's your work. And I know there's a lot of pressure to be published, but hang on to that if you can, that it's your work and you have the right to make decisions about it. I'm going to come back to that. You can probably already tell. When you send your article back with revisions, you want to include a cover letter. A lot of times they'll ask for this. You want to include a cover letter, and really, honestly, if you will take the time to take each requested revision that the editors and the peer reviewers have asked you for and address and tell them how, in your cover letter, tell them how you addressed that revision, how you made it. That's going to be hugely helpful to the publisher, to the editor who's going to read your revisions first. And they will remember that. They will remember you, and they'll remember that you did that. And if you want to publish something with them again, not a bad thing to get into their good graces. Have them remember something positive about you like that. And go easy with the timing of returning a revision to an editor. If you sit down wildly and you spend a week doing nothing but doing your revisions and you send it in at the end of the week, you may risk someone at the other end feeling like you rushed through your revisions, and that's not something that you want them to think. Honestly, I hesitated whether to even put that in my presentation, because I don't like to think of editors as judging a book by its cover, kind of. But I've heard several people say it, so I'm going to share it with you. On the other hand, you don't want to take too much time over your revisions either. If you agonize over them for 6 months, you may have passed the deadline for publishing the next issue. So it's a game. It's a balancing act. Probably the best thing to do to sort of solidify that is if you get a request from an editor to revise and resubmit, and this goes along with something else I was going to say in a few minutes anyway, respond to the editor, say thank you, really appreciate your time and your reviewer's time, about how long, can you give me a rough idea of when you would like to have this back? If he hasn't given you, the editor hasn't given you a deadline, ask for one. That way you know what his expectation or her expectations are. That tells the editor that you're responsive. And by the way, you always want to reply to any correspondence or communication from the editor of a journal. You want to at least acknowledge that you received their email or you got their phone message. Yes.
Is most of the communication done by email or phone? Any particular?
In my experience, it's done by email predominantly. There are probably a few journals out there that still want you to send them the printed copy of an article, but almost everybody is doing things by doing that kind of communication by email. So I was going through the possible outcomes to submitting something, and we talked about outright acceptance, and we talked about accepting with revisions. We talked at length about revise and resubmit, and of course the last possible outcome is rejection. If you're lucky, with a rejection you will get the reviewer's comments. That's an opportunity to revise what you've written and submit it to your Plan B publication. And that's part of you doing your homework that I kind of missed when I did that, talked about that at the very beginning of our discussion. You do want to have a Plan B. Aim high, make your Plan A journal that you're submitting to. Choose one of the most highly valued, the most highly rated, and have a Plan B. I can use just as example a publication in librarianship. If I submit something to the American Library Association's national journal and they reject it, maybe my Plan B is the Texas Library Association's journal. A little bit smaller publication, statewide versus nationwide, but still respected. Have a Plan B so that you can take advantage of those revision suggestions, even if the journal is not going to, that particular journal is not going to accept your publication. I already mentioned acknowledge correspondence. So the very best outcome, your publication is accepted for your article is accepted for publication. Yay! Celebrate. Well, reply to the editor's email and say thank you, and then celebrate. But then expect that you will be asked to sign a publication contract with that publisher. It's a lot of legal mumbo jumbo, maybe 2 or 3 pages worth, but it is very much worth your while to read it carefully. And this is where we get into copyright. Used to, all journals, the publication agreement was pretty much the same. The publisher took all of your copyrights. That meant that you couldn't put it in an institutional repository. You couldn't print out copies to use in your classroom. You couldn't even write another article based on what you wrote in the first article without the publisher's permission, because the publisher owned that article. Happily, that is very, very rarely the case nowadays, but that is something that you want to look at in your publisher agreement. And like everything else, there's shades of gray in publication, contracts for publication. And it's a decision that you will weigh when you make it. You'll weigh some different factors. One of those factors is if it's a very prestigious journal and they're asking you to give them most of your copyright, you may decide to go ahead and do that because of the prestige of the journal.
Especially if you're working towards tenure.
Yes.
You know, you've got 5 years roughly, maybe 6, but if you don't get those publications done within that time frame, you may not have a job, at least at that particular institution. So.
But do keep in mind that it's still, until you've signed that agreement, it is still 100% your work. And if you're not happy with the terms of the contract, talk to the editor about it. In fact, another one of the items on the bibliography in the handout is a link, is actually a web page that you can go to. There, the group called, the acronym is SPARK, and let me see if I can get the acronym right. Scholarly Publication and
Academic Resources
Academic
Coalition.
Research, okay, thank you. Scholarly Publication and Academic Resources Coalition. And they are very much involved in authors' copyright, and they have created and made available an addendum that you can submit with your signed contract with that publisher that asks them to agree to allow you to retain some of your copyright. And Denise has talked a little bit about why you might want to retain some of your copyright. I mean, beyond the fact that you want to be able to use your own work in your classroom. If you're a faculty member, you want to be able to share your article with your students, perhaps. And you certainly want to be able to, they create a derivative work is the copyright speech term for writing something based on what you have already written, what you've already published. You certainly want to do that. But we talked a bit at the beginning also about disseminating your work, and you're not getting paid for this article that you're submitting, at least not in the form of a check coming in the mail, but you are getting paid in the form of having others acknowledge your work. And others can't acknowledge your work if they can't get at your work. And that's the benefit of putting your work. A lot of researchers now have their own personal web page where they will include links to articles that they've written, peer-reviewed articles that they've written. Many more are using institutional repositories, and Denise talked about the Texas Digital Library. Texas A&M Corpus Christi actually has an institutional repository. It's in its very early days, and so there are still some glitches, but that's one of the projects that I'm working on with the library is getting people on campus, including students, as well as faculty and staff, to make their work available to the general public in Texas through the Texas A&M Institutional Repository and through the Texas A&M Institutional Repository, the Texas Digital Library. So, you know, the publication contract is a decision that you're going to want to weigh, but I want you to be aware of your options and what the possibilities are, and that you have options.
Sometimes you can retain the copyright yourself, just depending. I think one of my last, well, in the beginning, I had to turn over the copyright to the publisher, and I really didn't think of, I didn't think I had an alternative. These days, you probably would have an alternative. In the early days, though, I really wanted to get published. Now that I'm a little farther along, the last time I submitted something, I asked if I could retain my copyright. And the answer was kind of yes and no. The publisher would retain it, but they said that I could upload it to an institutional repository or to my own website, that kind of thing. So they gave me the flexibility to do what I wanted with my article. So
And
you can ask.
Yeah, that really is, that's an excellent point. Do ask. They won't tell you yes or no either way if you don't ask. Question?
Is there somebody that, like, at an institution or somebody that you're supposed to get in touch with to work that out, or are you just kind of on your own to?
As far as negotiating the contract with the publisher?
Right, like as far as where it might be made available, like on the university's webpage, on the institutional repository, on the Texas Library?
Yes, there usually is. And it's usually someone at the library. At least that's my experience. Here, if you are interested in putting something in the A&M Corpus Christi repository, I'm the person to talk to. And any of the librarians will be more than happy to talk to you about the publisher's agreement. They may refer you to me or Denise, but they almost all of them will have an opinion and be able to help you in the negotiation of that contract. At least I know that I would be more than willing to look at a publisher's contract and
She probably
make some
is the best person to ask.
make some suggestions about how to negotiate. But Denise is right. The Spark website also has lots of
They give you sample,
resources. So
addenda, I think.
yeah,
You know, where you might try to retain the copyright yourself.
yeah, it's kind of a fill in the blank.
There's a gray area
Yeah.
too.
Is there any like exception guidelines for institutional repositories, or is it, you know, if the journal's going to publish it, you want it in the institutional repository too?
I will speak about the A&M Corpus Christi repository, and this probably would extend to almost anybody else who's a part of the Texas Digital Library. But we would like to have almost anything that you've written. And it doesn't even have to be peer-reviewed. If you have a scholarly blog that you publish regularly on, putting a link to that in the repository would be great. We do ask that you sign. We have a little form that you sign where you attest to the fact that you own the copyright, or at least enough of the copyright to that work to allow you and allow us thereby to publish it on the web, make it freely available on the web. And by the way, that actually also is a publication contract. It's a form that says that you give A&M Corpus Christi and the Texas Digital Library limited, non-exclusive copyright to your work, and that allows us to make it freely available on our institutional repository.
And when you publish something on the web, your work is automatically copyrighted. You used to have to go through a process, and you saw that little C with the circle around it. The minute your work is out there on the web, it is considered copyrighted because it is disseminated. Okay.
Or in print as well. You created it, and unless you have assigned your copyrights to someone else, like a publisher, you automatically own the copyrights to anything that you created. Other questions? I'm pretty much at the end of my notes. So.
I have one question. In terms of like publishers like A&M University Press, in my dissertation on my lit review, one of my dissertation committee members mentioned that they really thought my lit review was pretty good, and I might even be able to publish it like in a small booklet. But how do you find a publisher that's interested in, and this particular faculty member just mentioned, you might try Texas A&M University Press. Well, I called and said, would you be interested in something like this on this topic? And they said, well, no, we really don't publish topics such as that,
The publisher that
How do you know
puts
where
out
to
a
go?
lot of bibliographies is Scarecrow.
Scarecrow.
So you might touch base with them. Actually, one of our librarians had a bibliography essentially on the Hmong Southeast Asians in America. And he asked about that too. Scarecrow did publish his bibliography. And a lot of times they will take, well, your bibliography is not esoteric, but sometimes they will take some strange, like utopian literature or whatever. So they might be a good publisher to check with. Scarecrow.
And the other thing you might do is look at your bibliography. Look at the other books that are in your bibliography and look at who published them. Because those are probably going to be people.
and don't